So Zelensky showed up to Washington, D.C. to meet with Donald Trump and friends. Here he is meeting with members of the cabinet or people in the Security Council, important people, not Trump in this particular first meeting. But you'll notice here that he is wearing a T-shirt. And people were wondering, will Zelensky wear a suit? Will he actually show respect this time? Or we end up getting a dressing down from Trump and his team for being disrespectful? That is what everybody wanted to know. But this meeting was not the meeting with Donald Trump. It did turn out that he ended up wearing a suit of some kind. It's kind of a black shirt with a black suit jacket, black pants. This is him meeting with the European leaders. Pretty much all of the European leaders showed up in order to show support for Zelensky. UK Prime Minister Starmer, Finnish President Stubb, French President Macron, Italian Prime Minister Meloni, German Chancellor Merz, and EU President Ursula von der Leyen there. So they all showed up to show support. This meeting here happened the day before. Well, it was yesterday. But then Trump and him did end up meeting. But before the meeting, Trump sent out this warning shot saying President Zelensky of Ukraine can end the war with Russia almost immediately if he wants to, or he can continue to fight. Remember how it started. No getting back Obama given Crimea 12 years ago without a shot being fired, and no going into NATO by Ukraine. Some things never change, says Donald Trump. But here they are meeting, and Trump actually compliments his suit.
The best I had. Pretty face.
President Trump, so your message to the people of Ukraine as world leaders gather here today.
We love them. We love them.
Russia continues.
Okay. So the big question is Donald Trump going to be sending troops to Ukraine? Because at one point in their meeting today in the White House, Trump seemed to indicate that could be a real possibility.
Your team has talked about security guarantees. Could that involve U.S. troops? Would you roll that out in the future?
We'll let you know that maybe later today. We're meeting with 7 great leaders of great countries also, and we'll be talking about that. They'll all be involved, but there'll be a lot of help. When it comes to security, there's going to be a lot of help. It's going to be good. They are first line of defense because they're there. They're Europe, but we're going to help them out also. We'll be involved.
Okay, so he's saying later today that he would be letting people know if U.S. troops would be involved. He goes on to say that a ceasefire is not needed. So this one's actually really confusing. What does he mean by this? How can you end a war without a ceasefire? And now you're talking about sending troops to Ukraine. This is not what people were thinking of when they wanted to end the war. I'll explain why he might be sending troops to Ukraine, what that could end up being like, and it's worse than we thought. I mean, at the end of the day, we're probably going to see an end to this war, but it's going to be the United States sitting in Ukraine the same way we sit in Germany and in Japan and in Italy and all over, where we just have more and more bases sitting everywhere. And the thinking is there might be even troops and bases set up in Ukraine in order to give them some non-NATO security guarantees, whatever that means. But here's Donald Trump saying we don't actually need a ceasefire.
A 30-day ceasefire or any type of ceasefire were not agreed to by Russia. Will there be severe consequences? Does that change because of
I don't think you need a ceasefire. You know, if you look at the 6 deals that I settled this year, they were all at war. I didn't do any ceasefires. And I know that it might be good to have, but I can also understand strategically why, one country or the other wouldn't want it. You have a ceasefire and they rebuild and rebuild and rebuild, and, maybe they don't want that. But if you look at the 6 deals that we made peace and long-term, long-running wars, I didn't do any ceasefires. Would I like the concept, I like the concept of a ceasefire for one reason, because you'd stop killing people immediately, as opposed to in 2 weeks or 1 week or whatever it takes. But we can work a deal where we're working on a peace deal while they're fighting. They have to fight. I wish they could stop. I'd like them to stop. But strategically, that could be a disadvantage for one side or the other. But all of these deals I made without even the mention of the words ceasefire.
I mean, I don't know exactly what that looks like, but he's talking about Armenia and Azerbaijan, which he just did last week. He hosted a summit where the leaders signed a peace agreement, a peace framework agreement, including the Trump route for international peace and prosperity aimed at ending decades of conflict between the two countries. Also, Thailand and Cambodia, a ceasefire was agreed to. I mean, I guess it wasn't in writing. I'm not sure what he means by that, but this was over some border clashes. Trump claimed involvement via social media, saying that, and also Malaysia said that they had also mediated. Israel and Iran, is that one over, though? Is that a peace agreement? Is that what is that? Do we really think that one's over? I don't think that one's over. I think that one's just, we just took it off the hot burner for a second. I think it's coming back, though. Rwanda and Democratic Republic of the Congo, a U.S. brokered peace agreement was aimed at ending decades-long conflict though experts say it is temporary and part of a history of broken deals between the two. So that would be, I think, similar to Israel and Iran. India and Pakistan in May, Trump announced a U.S.-mediated ceasefire over Kashmir, but Indian leaders, including PM Modi, disputed U.S. involvement. So Trump is, claiming some sort of, he's giving himself credit for that one, but they're saying, that he didn't really have anything to do with it. And Serbia and Kosovo, Trump claimed to have prevented an escalation, citing trade leverage, but Serbia denied war plans and evidence of a formal agreement. Or a significant U.S. role is limited on that. So those are the 6 that he's talking about. And so now he's saying, well, we can maybe come to a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine without a ceasefire agreement. I'm not really sure what that, I mean, what is that? And then on top of it, you're not going to have a ceasefire and you're potentially going to send U.S. troops into Ukraine. We're going to have permanent bases now set up in Ukraine, even though they're not a NATO member. He says he's going to have to call Putin right after this meeting, so we'll see how that phone call goes a little later.
Was there any aspect of your discussion with Vladimir Putin that left you disappointed?
Look, I was just telling the president, I just spoke to President Putin indirectly, and we're going to have a phone call right after these meetings today. And we may or may not have a trilat. If we don't have a trilat, then the fighting continues. And if we do, we have a good chance. I think if we have a trilat, there's a good chance of maybe ending it. But he's expecting my call when we're finished with this meeting.
Okay. He's expecting the call. And that is because when Trump went and met with Vladimir Putin in Alaska, one of the agreements that they didn't really end up coming to an agreement. I mean, it wasn't they had a lot of discussions. They both said the discussions went well, but they didn't come to any sort of agreement or ceasefire. But one thing that was discussed was Trump saying, all right, look, what if you got to keep all the territory that you've already taken? And that includes like the Donbass, that includes Crimea, and we just recognize it as your territory. So none of this kind of, that Crimea still belongs to Ukraine. He's basically saying we'll recognize it as Russian territory. In exchange, we need to give Ukraine some security guarantees that are not NATO. We won't put them in NATO, but it will be NATO-esque. NATO-esque without being in NATO officially. And apparently Vladimir Putin agreed somewhat to this and thought, okay, tentatively seemed to agree to it. So that is what Donald Trump is talking about when he's talking about U.S. troops potentially being placed in Ukraine, as well as other European nations. I mean, it sounds like NATO, like a NATO base will live in Ukraine without Ukraine being part of NATO. That's what it sounds like the agreement is. In exchange for Russia gaining all the territory, being recognized as a territory being theirs, and also being brought back into the world sphere of influence rather than being alienated and isolated out. And that could be, a play for Russia where that could be that sounds actually like a really good bargaining chip that Trump gave to them, which is, look, we know you want to be recognized. We know you want this land. And so how about we just give you all of that in exchange? Just let us stick a base in Ukraine and they won't be in NATO, but, we'll give them the security guarantees that they need so that they can feel like they can back down from this. Like, what do you say? What do you say, Vlad? And Vlad apparently said, okay, that sounds reasonable. So let's see how the discussion with Zelensky goes. So that's where we're at with it. And that's why there might end up being endless U.S. troops sitting in Ukraine. And I don't know if that is what Americans had in mind when we were talking about ending this war. Did you envision or did you want a U.S. base, a NATO base with U.S. troops permanently in Ukraine? I mean, look, I understand the deal. I understand this art of this deal in particular. I understand maybe that's what both sides, but why do we even have to do anything like that? Why can't we just say to Ukraine, we're out of here. We're not giving you any more weapons. We're not supporting this war anymore. You're just going to have to make peace with your neighbor. Your neighbor's never going away because you just can't move land. We can go, but your neighbor's never going away. You're just going to have to get along with them. You're going to have to remain neutral like you did before. Like, why can't we just do that and say enough is enough? We're just not giving you any more. We just can't. Well, Bill Clinton, surprisingly, out of all the people, actually gave me room to, a moment to pause and really think, because he made a really good point about why he supports Ukraine, why he thinks we have to help them. And he says it's actually all my fault. And that is why we can't back down and we have to help Ukraine at all costs. And this is what he says.
What's happening in Ukraine?
Well, I knew that President Putin did not support the agreement President Yeltsin made never to interfere with Ukraine's territorial boundaries. An agreement he made because he wanted Ukraine to give up their nuclear weapons. They were afraid to give them up because they thought that's the only thing that protected them from an expansionist Russia. So he gave them up. Yeltsin's word was good. He kept his word, but he couldn't pass it through the Duma. So when it became convenient to him, President Putin broke it and first took Crimea. And I feel terrible about it because Ukraine is a very important country, and I feel a personal stake because I got them to agree to give up their nuclear weapons, and none of them believe that Russia would have pulled this stunt if Ukraine still had their weapons. Mm-hmm. So I think what Mr. Putin did was very wrong. And I believe Europe and the United States should continue to support Ukraine. There may come a time when the Ukrainian government believes that they can think of a peace agreement they could live with, but I don't think the rest of us should cut and run on them.
That's the first good argument I've actually heard about why we should stay and help Ukraine. That's actually the first good argument. And it's, look, because we put them in this mess. And we talked them into giving up their nuclear weapons. We talked them into it. I mean, Bill Clinton is sitting there saying, I talked them into this. And they agreed because they believed that we would, protect them, that Russia wouldn't invade them. They went into it under this program of denuclearization, and we talked them into it. And so at some point, you have to take responsibility, and the U.S. with Russia then ultimately invading Ukraine, which maybe they would not have done, probably would not have done if Ukraine still had their nuclear weapons. There is an argument to be made that we have to stick with our responsibilities, that we have to make good on the promises that we made. Even if we don't agree with the promises, we never should have talked Ukraine out of nuclearization. I don't know really what the climate was going on around that time that made it to where, was it a push for worldwide denuclearization, which obviously didn't happen? What was it that we were dangling over Ukraine to say, you need to give up your nukes? Like, why? Why did they need to do that? But we did do that. And so with that, there does come a level of responsibility. We can't go back in the past and act like we didn't do that now at this juncture. We did. And again, whether you supported that policy or not, it happened. And so just like Afghanistan, when I look at the ending of that war, it was atrocious how we got out of Afghanistan. Now, I am not debating whether or not we should have gotten out of Afghanistan. Absolutely, we should have gotten out of Afghanistan. And I don't think we should have even went into Afghanistan. The whole thing was a disaster from day one. But the fact was we did go in. And when we left, we had a responsibility. We really should have left with the people that we turned into traitors. We took a whole group of Afghanis and said, you're going to be traitors to your own people. They agreed to it. They worked for the United States government. They worked with the U.S. military, and we left them behind to be slaughtered. So there's a responsibility there. Do I think we should have ever gone into Afghanistan? No. The war should have never happened, but it did. Same with Iraq, but it did. And when you leave, when you evacuate, you've got to take the people with you. I mean, it's your responsibility at that point, whether you like it or not. That is the mess you made. Just like, we'll get into it a bit later, but a lot of people on the right are mad about us having to take in a lot of these Middle Eastern refugees. Well, then stop making wars. Stop creating refugees if you don't want to have to take them in. Instead of saying, well, why don't all these other countries take them in? They're not the ones who started these damn wars. We did. So why should they have to clean up our mess? And that is, there is no ethics or morality in, good. We have to clean up our own messes. We don't leave messes for other people. And unfortunately, when it comes to Ukraine and Bill Clinton and his sentiment on it, we kind of created this mess by saying to Ukraine, you should denuclearize and trust us, it's going to be cool. And it wasn't. It ended up not being. I mean, this is a big lesson. I mean, you got to think about, what if you're Iran right now and you're watching this happen? All the more reasons to build nukes. All the more reasons for every single country in the world to say, well, I need my own nukes, because how can I trust you to actually fight for us? I mean, all of Europe should be wondering this right now. Yes, we have this NATO agreement, but who's to say we have to actually uphold any of our agreements or any of our promises? Because we're not good at it, it turns out. Turns out we're often running from our obligations. So if you're Europe, why would you even trust NATO anymore? Why are they holding on to it for dear life, when obviously they could be abandoned at any moment by the United States government, and probably will be in a future administration, because so many Americans are no longer interested in defending Europe and being a part of European wars. So we have to take responsibility for ourselves and the actions that we have, the messes we've created. And part of this mess is now, and we never know the ramifications when we do things like this, but part of the mess now is that you've got all these countries around the world looking and saying, I see now what happens if you don't have nukes. Either you guys are going to get us, or somebody's going to get us. Somebody's going to get us. You end up like Gaddafi, or you end up like Ukraine, or you could end up like North Korea, where everybody just leaves you the hell alone because you got nukes. You did it. You finally went. Everybody was worried you were going to do it. They kept looking at you like, what are you doing? You're getting nukes. You're not allowed to have nukes. We're going to come after you. We're going to get you. And North Korea said, not if we can get nukes before you try to come get us. And they did. And now nobody talks about North Korea anymore. Instead, you had Trump going over there, shaking his hand, being like, we got to make peace with you because you have nukes. So this is a lesson, I think, for every country on earth. I mean, the precedent we're setting is it's important to have nukes if you don't want to be invaded, if you don't want to be toppled, if you don't want your country potentially destroyed by one power or the other, whether it be the United States or Russia or China or anybody. I mean, South Korea remains at the threshold, or Taiwan, I believe. Taiwan remains at the threshold, similar to Iran, of always getting real close to having a nuke. I believe it's Taiwan. It could be. It's one of those Asian countries, and they're always at the threshold because they're like, yeah, we just want to make sure that China doesn't come after us at some point. If we have some nukes and we have some defense, and that is not a dumb strategy. It turns out. Time and time again, it's proven to be really the only strategy for self-protection of a sovereign nation. So, I mean, look, I'm not, we should not be involved in Ukraine. We shouldn't be involved. Somehow we've got to end this war. But I do hear Bill Clinton's point on this. And it's one I hadn't thought about, that we put them, not only did we put them in this position by telling them to denuclearize, but we also made a lot of false promises to Ukraine. We kept saying to them, oh, sure, yeah, we'll talk about putting you into NATO later. Yeah, later, buddy, we'll do it later. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Ukraine believed it. And also Ukraine with the European Union. Oh, yeah, we might bring you into the EU. That'd be great, right? You could use the euro and all these great things. We'll talk about it. We'll get back to you. Always giving them lip service, but keeping their hopes up and pushing them and using them as bait for Russia to piss off Russia. And now here they are. And yeah, I see the point in we would be evading our responsibility if we gave up and walked away on Ukraine at this point. And no one in the world will trust us. I don't know if the world trusts us at this point, but it is a good argument. It's the only good argument I've heard in these 3.5 years of this war, of why we should actually back Ukraine. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that. I mean, how do we not run from our responsibilities, not end up being the biggest jerks on the planet, yet not continue doing this war forever? And I'm not a fan of having another forever base in a foreign country where we send our troops. I'm not in favor of that either. So what is the solution here? I would love to hear from you. Tweet at me at Kim Iverson Show. Love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson Show, which you can catch Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. It is free for you to watch. Again, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, KimIversonShow.com. See you there.